Welcome, rookies, to the History Detective Academy. Go ahead and grab your magnifying glasses, maybe pour yourselves a giant cup of coffee, and take a seat. I am so thrilled you're here today because we are officially opening up an ancient cold case. In today's explainer, we're putting on our detective hats to investigate one of the absolute most famous names in human history. We're going to look strictly at the facts, build ourselves a murder board, and just follow the evidence wherever it leads us. It's going to be an incredibly fun and eye-opening investigation. But before we actually get to the evidence, we do need to address a pretty massive rumor. Bertrand Russell, who was a Nobel Prize winner and honestly one of the most brilliant philosophers of the 20th century, famously wrote whether Christ ever actually existed in history is a matter of considerable doubt. Now look, Russell was a certified genius in logic, but this brilliantly illustrates that even Nobel laureates can completely bomb History 101. Professional historians literally cringe when they read this today. So we're going to use this quote as the ultimate myth that we need to bust in today's class. And really, that brings us to our core investigative question. Did Jesus of Nazareth actually exist? Just to be crystal clear from the jump, class, we are not looking for spiritual metaphors today. We are hunting for hard, undeniable, historical evidence that a specific man actually walked the dirt roads of first-century Palestine. Like, did he breathe real air? Did he gather real followers? And was he put to death by a real Roman governor? To do this right, though, we need a quick impartiality check. Here are the ground rules for the Academy. We absolutely do not do theology in this classroom. We're completely separating the historical fact of this man's existence from the theological question of his divinity. Whether he was the Son of God, well, that's a matter of faith, and we are leaving that right at the door. Today, we just do the cold, hard, impartial facts. No sermons here, just ancient historical sources. All right, let's jump right into phase 1 of our investigation, interrogating secular witnesses. Okay, let's dive into this. If you're a detective trying to prove someone actually existed, your best witnesses aren't usually their friends, right? I mean, they might be biased. Your absolute strongest evidence comes from people who actively despise them. So, meet our 3 prime secular witnesses: Tacitus, Lucian, and Pliny the Younger. We're going to bring these ancient heavyweights into the interrogation room one by one. And keep their motive in mind. They all found the early Christians incredibly annoying, super weird, or just outright dangerous to the Roman Empire. They had absolutely zero reason to invent a historical founder for a group they desperately wanted to just disappear. Step into the crime scene, rookies, and put on your gloves. We are treating this quote from Tacitus like a glowing piece of evidence under a blacklight. Now, Tacitus is widely considered ancient Rome's greatest historian. He's writing about the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, and he mentions that Emperor Nero blamed this group called the Christians. Tacitus writes that the founder of this name, Christus, was put to death by Pontius Pilate in the reign of Tiberius, and that the pernicious superstition was repressed for a time but broke out again. Let's actually pull the exact clues from that quote and pin them right to our murder board. Look at the fingerprints we just found. Tacitus, who again is a hostile Roman source, confirms 5 very specific historical facts. 1. A man named Christus. 2. Executed by Pontius Pilate. 3. During the reign of Emperor Tiberius. 4. The movement was temporarily repressed, meaning his followers scattered. And 5. It broke out again. This completely busts the skeptical theory that there was no formal Roman execution. Tacitus practically hands us the entire police report here. Next up in the hot seat is Lucian of Samosata. Honestly, I kind of like to call Lucian the ancient equivalent of an internet troll. He was a Greek satirist in the 2nd century who wrote entirely to mock and sneer at Christians. He called them misguided creatures who worshipped a crucified sophist over in Palestine. But here is the critical detective insight. Amidst all his mockery and trolling, he never once calls Jesus a myth. He inadvertently confirms that Jesus was a real, historical, crucified person whose followers were deeply committed to what he taught. Witness number 3 is Pliny the Younger. Just think of Pliny as a highly stressed-out middle manager. It's 112 AD, he's the Roman governor of Bithynia, and he is writing an incredibly panicky email, well, a letter, to his CEO, Emperor Trajan. Pliny's complaining that he just doesn't know what to do with all these Christians who refuse to stop singing hymns to Christ as to a god. He's literally asking his boss for legal advice on how to execute them properly. This proves that just 80 years after the cross, the movement following this historical figure was so massive it was causing actual administrative headaches for the Roman Empire. Which brings us to phase 2, interrogating hostile witness testimonies. So we've heard from the Romans, right? But what about the Jewish authorities of the first century? They had the absolute biggest motive to say Jesus was a total fabrication just to protect their own authority. They could have simply said, he never existed, fake news. Instead, what we see in the Babylonian Talmud is a record stating Jesus was hanged on the eve of Passover because he practiced sorcery. Now, do you catch the brilliant little detail there? By accusing him of sorcery, his earliest enemies accidentally confirm that he performed undeniable, remarkable deeds that they just couldn't ignore. They had to explain his actions away, which totally proves he was there performing them.
To really cement this, we call Josephus to the stand. Josephus is arguably the most important Jewish historian of the first century. And he was employed by Rome, so he had zero reason to promote Christianity. Yet, in his work, Jewish Antiquities, he describes Jesus as a wise man and a doer of startling deeds. He confirms that Pilate condemned him to the cross and that the tribe of Christians had not disappeared. So the crucial takeaway here is that Josephus cements the exact same facts we just found at the Roman crime scenes. That is independent corroboration, detectives.
All right, rookies, put your pencils down. It is time for a Phase 3 pop quiz timeline check. Wake up, stretch your arms out, let's see just how sharp your memories are today. So, a super common skeptical claim is that the story of Jesus was just a myth that slowly developed over hundreds of years. You know, like a giant game of historical telephone. To bust that, we need to look at how tightly packed our evidence trail really is. The crucifixion happens around 33 AD. Fast forward to 64 AD, Nero is blaming Christians for the fire, as we saw with Tacitus. By 112 AD, Pliny is stressing out over massive numbers of followers. But the smoking gun? That is right there at 35 AD. Scholars across the board agreed that the Apostle Paul received a formal creed outlining the death and resurrection of Jesus around 35 AD. That is just 2 to 5 years after the actual events. And that 35 AD creed, which you can find in 1 Corinthians 15, is early Christian evidence at its absolute finest. These aren't late-stage myths developed over centuries by people who never even met the guy. These are raw, historical, confessional statements circulating immediately. They detail his birth, his disciples, his crucifixion, and his reported resurrection. These claims were being made within months and years of the events by people directly connected to the eyewitnesses. You simply cannot form a legendary myth that quickly while the people who actually lived in the same town are still walking around to correct you. And that brings us to the final scholar's verdict. Listen to this quote from Professor F.F. Bruce of Manchester University. "The historicity of Christ is as axiomatic for an unbiased historian as the historicity of Julius Caesar. Basically, whether you're an atheist, a skeptic, a believer, or just a highly stressed Roman governor, the secular historians universally agree on the basic facts of his life and death. The historical evidence surpasses that of almost any other ancient founder." Detectives, we can safely close this case file. Jesus of Nazareth was, without a doubt, a real man. Congratulations on a highly successful investigation, rookies. You passed the History Detective Academy with flying colors. But as we wrap up today's explainer, I do want to leave you with a final provocative mystery. We have proven beyond a historical doubt that this one life, cut short on a Roman cross in some dusty outpost of the empire, was real. So here's the lingering question for you. If this was just one ordinary historical life, how did it leave the single biggest footprint in Western history? How did art, science, politics, and human rights get entirely reshaped by a man who never wrote a book or held a political office? Now that is a mystery worth pondering. Keep your magnifying glasses handy, keep asking great questions, and I'll see you in our next explainer.